July 9, 1943, Mediterranean Sea. Through darkness and violent winds, the largest amphibious armada yet assembled in human history approaches the coast of Sicily. Over 2,590 vessels, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, and landing craft carry 160,000 Allied troops toward hostile shores. Gale-force winds whip the sea into chaos. Soldiers, packed into landing craft, battle seasickness as waves crash over gunwales. Paratroopers preparing for night drops face winds that will scatter them across the Sicilian countryside. This is Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, the first assault on Axis-controlled Europe since Dunkirk, and the largest amphibious operation attempted to this point in the war. If successful, it will knock Italy out of the war, secure the Mediterranean sea lanes, and provide a springboard for attacks on mainland Europe. If it fails, the Allied offensive momentum gained in North Africa will be squandered, and Nazi Germany will have months to strengthen its European fortress. Leading this massive enterprise are two of the war's most controversial commanders. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, coordinating the operation's strategic aspects, and his subordinates, the flamboyant American General George S. Patton commanding the U.S. 7th Army, and the methodical British General Bernard Montgomery commanding the British 8th Army. Their forces will land on Sicily's southern coast in the pre-dawn hours of July 10th, beginning a 38-day campaign that will test Allied cooperation, reveal the Wehrmacht's continued effectiveness, and demonstrate that liberating Nazi-occupied Europe will be far harder than optimists hoped. The invasion of Sicily represents a strategic compromise born from Anglo-American disagreements about the war's direction. It will produce remarkable tactical successes, bitter command rivalries, controversial decisions, and ultimately open the door to Italy's collapse. This is the story of Operation Husky, the campaign that transformed the Mediterranean and set the stage for the liberation of Western Europe. The decision to invade Sicily emerged from the Casablanca Conference of January 1943, where President Franklin Roosevelt, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and their military chiefs debated Allied strategy after the anticipated victory in North Africa. The Americans favored concentrating forces for a cross-channel invasion of France in 1943. The British, scarred by memories of World War I and recent disasters like Dieppe, argued for a Mediterranean strategy that would weaken Germany before launching the decisive blow. Churchill advocated attacking what he called the soft underbelly of Europe, the Mediterranean periphery where Allied naval superiority and air power could be brought to bear. Sicily offered obvious strategic advantages. Its capture would secure Mediterranean sea lanes, eliminating the need for convoys to take the long route around Africa. It would provide air bases for bombing southern Europe. It might knock Italy out of the war, forcing Germany to divert forces to defend the Italian peninsula. And it would maintain offensive momentum, while forces accumulated for the eventual cross-channel invasion. The Americans reluctantly agreed, concerned that Mediterranean operations would drain resources from the planned invasion of France. General George Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff, worried about suction pump effects, each Mediterranean operation leading to another, indefinitely postponing the decisive campaign. But with insufficient forces available for France in 1943, and with victorious armies in North Africa requiring employment, Sicily offered the best option for maintaining pressure on Germany. Planning began while the North African campaign still raged. The plan's final form reflected compromise between American and British approaches. Montgomery's 8th Army would land on Sicily's southeastern coast near Syracuse and drive north toward Messina, the strait separating Sicily from mainland Italy. Patton's 7th Army would land to Montgomery's left, securing the British flank and capturing western Sicilian ports and airfields. The two forces would pinch the Axis forces in northeastern Sicily, preventing their escape to Italy. The plan had inherent tensions. Montgomery's route was the most direct to Messina but faced the strongest defenses. Patton's role was essentially supporting Montgomery, hardly a mission likely to appeal to the aggressive American commander. These tensions would explode during the campaign, creating rivalries that affected Allied operations through war's end. Axis forces on Sicily numbered approximately 230,000 Italian and 40,000 German troops. The Italian defenders, comprising 6 coastal divisions and 4 field divisions, were poorly equipped, inadequately trained, and increasingly demoralized after defeats in North Africa. Many units consisted of Sicilian conscripts with limited enthusiasm for defending their home island against liberation. Italian commanders privately doubted their forces' reliability. The German presence was more formidable. The 15th Panzer Grenadier Division and the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, though not at full strength, contained experienced soldiers with modern equipment. German commanders under General Hans-Valentin Hube understood they faced overwhelming Allied superiority. Their strategy was pragmatic: delay the Allied advance, conduct a fighting withdrawal, and evacuate as many troops as possible to mainland Italy where they could continue the defense. The invasion began badly. On the night of July 9-10, British and American paratroopers took off from North African bases to seize key objectives inland from the beaches. The 82nd Airborne Division's 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment was to capture crossroads near Gela. British 1st Airborne Division was to seize the Pont Grand Bridge south of Syracuse. Both operations descended into chaos. High winds, inadequate navigation, and inexperienced pilots scattered the paratroopers across Sicily. Of 3,400 American paratroopers, only 200 landed near their objectives. The rest were scattered across a 50-mile radius, some landing as far as 50 miles from their drop zones. British paratroopers fared similarly. Of 1,900 men in 134 gliders, only 12 gliders landed near the Pont Grand Bridge. 69 gliders crashed into the sea, drowning many occupants. Despite the chaos, small groups of paratroopers caused disproportionate confusion, cutting communications, ambushing Axis patrols, and creating the impression of a much larger force. At 2:45 hours on July 10th, the amphibious assault began. Along a 150-mile front, landing craft headed toward Sicilian beaches. The rough seas that scattered paratroopers now worked to Allied advantage. Axis commanders assumed no invasion would be attempted in such weather. The landings achieved tactical surprise. On the American sector near Gela, Licata, and Scaglietti, the 1st and 45th Infantry Divisions landed with acceptable casualties. Resistance varied wildly. Some Italian coastal units surrendered immediately. Others fought briefly before retreating. The greatest challenge was the weather, capsized landing craft, soaked equipment, and difficult unloading of vehicles and supplies. On the British sector near Syracuse and the Pacino Peninsula, Montgomery's 8th Army came ashore against light resistance. Italian defenders, demoralized and convinced of Allied invincibility after North Africa, surrendered in large numbers. By evening of July 10th, the Allies had established firm beachheads. Over 80,000 troops were ashore, with another 80,000 arriving in subsequent waves. Casualties were remarkably light, fewer than 2,000 killed and wounded in the initial assault. But success brought new dangers. On the night of July 11-12, a second American paratrooper drop to reinforce the Gela beachhead nearly ended in disaster. As the C-47 transport aircraft carrying the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment approached Sicily, nervous anti-aircraft gunners on Allied ships opened fire, despite having been warned of the flight. Other ships joined the barrage. 23 aircraft were shot down and 37 damaged. 81 American paratroopers were killed by friendly fire. The disaster demonstrated the difficulties of coordinating complex amphibious operations and the deadly consequences of miscommunication. The German response came swiftly. On July 11th, the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, stationed inland, launched a counterattack toward Gela. Tiger tanks and infantry struck the 1st Infantry Division's beachhead. The American position was precarious. Units were still consolidating, heavy weapons were incomplete ashore, and the scattered paratroopers had created gaps in the defensive line. The battle for Gela became desperate. German tanks penetrated to within a few hundred yards of the beach. American infantry, supported by paratroopers who had finally assembled, fought with anti-tank weapons, artillery, and sheer determination. Naval gunfire proved decisive. Destroyers moved close inshore, firing directly at German armor. The cruiser USS Boise fired over 1,000 6-inch shells in support of ground forces. Under this devastating fire, the German counterattack stalled and withdrew. Further east at Nisemi, the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division attacked the 45th Infantry Division. Again, fierce fighting and naval gunfire stopped the German advance. By July 14th, both German divisions had withdrawn to defensive positions. They had inflicted casualties and delayed the American advance, but they had not driven the Allies back into the sea. The beachheads were secure. These counterattacks revealed patterns that would define the campaign. German forces fought skillfully, using terrain to advantage, conducting aggressive counterattacks, and inflicting disproportionate casualties. But they faced overwhelming Allied advantages in numbers, firepower, and especially naval and air support. Each German tactical success was tactical, strategic defeat was inevitable. The only question was how long German forces could delay Allied victory. With beachheads secure, the campaign entered its operational phase, the advance to Messina. Here, personal rivalries and national pride shaped strategy as much as military necessity. Montgomery's plan called for the 8th Army to advance up Sicily's eastern coast toward Messina, while Patton's 7th Army protected his left flank. This supporting role grated on Patton, who sought glory equal to Montgomery's. Montgomery's advance up Highway 114 toward Catania encountered strong German resistance. The terrain favored defense, narrow coastal roads, mountains pressing close to the sea, and limited room for maneuver. German forces established defensive lines, held them stubbornly, then withdrew to the next position. Progress was measured in miles per day, not miles per hour. Frustrated by slow progress, Montgomery requested permission to use Highway 124, an inland road originally assigned to the Americans. General Harold Alexander, commanding 15th Army Group and coordinating Allied forces, approved, a decision that infuriated Patton. The American general believed Alexander and Montgomery viewed Americans as inferior troops suitable only for supporting roles. Patton decided to demonstrate American capabilities through action. On July 15th, he received permission from Alexander to advance westward to capture Palermo, Sicily's capital, on the island's northwestern coast. This westward advance, away from Messina, made limited strategic sense. Palermo's capture contributed little to trapping Axis forces, but it offered opportunity for dramatic success and positive publicity. Patton's drive on Palermo showcased American mobility and aggression. The 2nd Armored Division and 3rd Infantry Division covered 100 miles in 4 days through Sicily's mountainous interior, brushing aside Italian resistance. On July 22nd, American forces entered Palermo to cheering crowds. The capture of 53,000 Italian prisoners made headlines worldwide. Patton had his triumph. But the strategic prize remained Messina. With Palermo captured, Patton turned his attention eastward. His forces would advance along Sicily's northern coast, parallel to Montgomery's advance along the southern coast, both converging on Messina. What developed was an undeclared race. Patton was determined to reach Messina before Montgomery, both for personal glory and to prove American forces were Montgomery's equals. While Allied commanders competed for glory, German forces conducted a masterful fighting withdrawal. General Hube, commanding Axis forces on Sicily, recognized that holding the island was impossible. His objective became orderly evacuation to mainland Italy with maximum forces and equipment. Hitler authorized withdrawal on July 15th, and German planners began organizing Operation Leogang, the evacuation across the Strait of Messina. The terrain favored defense. Northeastern Sicily is dominated by Mount Etna, Europe's tallest active volcano. Roads spiraling around Etna's slopes created natural defensive positions. The Germans established a series of defensive lines, the Etna Line, then successive positions closer to Messina, each designed to delay Allied advances while evacuation proceeded. German tactics were effective. They positioned forces on commanding heights, covered roads with anti-tank guns, and used the mountainous terrain to negate Allied advantages in armor and numbers. When Allied pressure became too great, they withdrew to the next line under cover of darkness. Engineers demolished bridges, mined roads, and created obstacles that slowed pursuit. This methodical withdrawal frustrated Allied commanders but worked exactly as intended. Allied advances along both coasts encountered the same pattern. American forces driving east along Highway 113 and British forces pushing north along Highway 114 faced determined resistance at every defensible position. The Germans would fight long enough to inflict casualties and delay the advance, then withdraw before being outflanked or overwhelmed. The Allies attempted to break the stalemate with amphibious end runs, landing forces behind German lines to cut off retreating units. Patton authorized 3 small amphibious operations along Sicily's northern coast. Each operation landed successfully and captured its immediate objectives, but German forces withdrew before the trap could close. The rough terrain and limited roads meant small amphibious forces could be bypassed or contained until they linked up with the main advance, by which time German forces had already withdrawn. The campaign demonstrated the difficulty of trapping a skillful, determined enemy conducting a fighting withdrawal in mountainous terrain. Despite overwhelming Allied superiority, German forces maintained cohesion and continued inflicting casualties throughout the withdrawal. By early August, Axis forces had withdrawn to a small perimeter around Messina. The end was obvious: Messina would fall. The question was whether Allied forces could trap significant enemy forces before evacuation to Italy. The answer would prove embarrassing. On the night of August 11-12, the Germans began Operation Leogang. Using every available vessel, ferries, barges, landing craft, even rafts, they evacuated troops and equipment across the 3-mile-wide Strait of Messina. Allied air forces bombed the strait and approached roads. Allied naval forces shelled the crossing points, but anti-aircraft batteries on both sides of the strait created a protective umbrella. Ferries operated around the clock. The evacuation proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Over 6 days and 7 nights, the Germans evacuated approximately 40,000 German troops, 10,000 Italian troops, 10,000 vehicles, 47 tanks, 94 artillery pieces, and thousands of tons of supplies. It was a humiliating demonstration of German organizational skill and Allied failure to complete the encirclement. The race to Messina reached its climax on August 17th. American forces of Patton's 7th Army entered Messina hours before British forces arrived. Patton, who had obsessed over beating Montgomery to the city, savored the moment. He sent Montgomery a message. "This is a horse race in which the prestige of the U.S. Army is at stake. We must take Messina before the British." When American troops arrived first, Patton felt vindicated. But the victory was hollow. Messina was an empty prize. Axis forces had successfully withdrawn. The campaign was over, but at what cost and to what purpose? These questions would dominate post-campaign assessments. The 38-day campaign cost the Allies approximately 24,000 casualties, 7,400 Americans killed, wounded, or missing, 12,800 British and Canadian casualties, and 4,700 other Allied forces. The Axis lost approximately 29,000 casualties, plus 140,000 prisoners, mostly Italians who surrendered en masse. But the Germans evacuated their most effective forces intact to continue fighting in Italy. Material losses were significant. The Allies lost approximately 400 aircraft. The Axis lost over 1,850 aircraft, hundreds of tanks, and vast quantities of supplies abandoned during the withdrawal. But the successful German evacuation meant veteran units would fight again on the Italian mainland. The strategic consequences were mixed. Sicily's capture secured Mediterranean sea lanes, saving weeks of convoy sailing time. Allied air forces gained bases for bombing southern Europe. The invasion accelerated Italy's political collapse. On July 25th, the fascist Grand Council voted to remove Mussolini from power. King Victor Emmanuel III ordered Mussolini's arrest. The new government under Marshal Pietro Badoglio began secret negotiations with the Allies, leading to Italy's surrender on September 8, 1943. However, Italy's surrender did not remove Italian territory from the war. German forces, anticipating Italian collapse, had reinforced the peninsula. When Italy surrendered, Germans swiftly disarmed Italian forces and occupied the country. Instead of a rapid advance through a surrendering Italy, the Allies faced a grinding campaign up the Italian peninsula against German forces fighting from prepared positions in ideal defensive terrain. The Sicily campaign revealed troubling patterns. Allied amphibious operations were successful but complex and difficult to coordinate, as the friendly fire incident with paratroopers demonstrated. Allied advantages in numbers and firepower could overcome German defenders, but German forces repeatedly demonstrated superior tactical skill. The Germans' ability to evacuate forces from Sicily despite Allied air and naval superiority suggested future operations would not trap and destroy enemy armies as easily as hoped. Command relationships proved problematic. The Patton-Montgomery rivalry, while providing drive and competitive energy, also created friction. Alexander's weak coordination allowed both commanders to pursue separate objectives rather than concentrating forces for decisive results. Eisenhower learned valuable lessons about coalition management that would serve him well in Northwest Europe. During the Sicily campaign, Patton committed actions that nearly ended his career. On August 3rd and August 10th, while visiting field hospitals, Patton encountered soldiers diagnosed with battle fatigue, what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Believing the men were cowards, Patton verbally abused them and struck them. In one incident, he drew his pistol and threatened to shoot a soldier. Word of the incidents reached Eisenhower, who was appalled. Patton's actions violated military regulations and basic human decency. Eisenhower faced a dilemma. Patton was one of the Allies' most effective field commanders, aggressive and capable, but his behavior was inexcusable. Eisenhower ordered Patton to apologize to the soldiers, the medical staff, and every division in his army. Patton complied, though humiliated. The incidents remained secret until journalist Drew Pearson revealed them in November 1943. The resulting scandal forced Eisenhower to sideline Patton temporarily. Patton would not receive another combat command until the Normandy invasion planning was well advanced. His absence from command for nearly 9 months represented a significant consequence for his actions. The incidents revealed tensions inherent in modern warfare. Combat produces psychological casualties as surely as physical ones. Commanders must understand this reality. Patton's old-school warrior mentality, courage above all, no excuse for weakness, was increasingly inadequate for modern war's psychological demands. The U.S. Army would slowly develop better understanding of combat stress, though full recognition of PTSD would not come until decades later. Operation Husky served as a crucial learning experience for the later Normandy invasion. The lessons were sobering. Amphibious operations. The Sicily landings demonstrated that properly planned and supported amphibious assaults could succeed against defended coasts. But coordination was critical. The friendly fire incident showed the deadly consequences of miscommunication. Planners for Normandy would incorporate Sicily's lessons into their preparations. Air and naval support. The decisive importance of naval gunfire and air superiority was unmistakable. German counterattacks at Gela were stopped by naval guns. Allied air forces, after destroying Axis air power, could operate freely. Future amphibious operations would require similar overwhelming support. German defensive skill. The Wehrmacht's fighting withdrawal demonstrated that German forces, even when outnumbered and outgunned, could conduct effective defensive operations. The Germans' ability to delay vastly superior forces, inflict disproportionate casualties, and evacuate forces successfully meant that defeating Germany would require sustained, costly operations. Hopes for quick victory after landing in Europe were unrealistic. Terrain matters. Sicily's mountainous terrain channelized operations and favored defense. Italy's terrain was worse. The Italian campaign would become a grueling slog through mountains, a far cry from the rapid exploitation many had anticipated. Future operations would need to account for terrain's impact on operational tempo. Command relationships. The Patton-Montgomery rivalry, while adding competitive energy, also created problems. Clear command relationships and unified strategic direction were essential. Eisenhower would eventually insist on stronger authority for future operations. Coalition warfare. Managing Allied coalitions required diplomatic skill as much as military expertise. National pride and inter-service rivalries had to be balanced against operational necessities. Eisenhower's experience in Sicily helped prepare him for commanding the vast coalition that would invade Northwest Europe. Operation Husky achieved its strategic objectives. Sicily was captured, Mediterranean sea lanes secured, and Italy knocked out of the war, though Italian surrender paradoxically led to German occupation rather than liberation. The campaign demonstrated Allied capability to conduct large-scale amphibious operations and sustain offensives against determined German resistance. But the campaign also revealed how difficult liberating Europe would be. The Germans had evacuated their best forces from Sicily to fight again in Italy. The Italian campaign would become one of the war's most grueling, a 20-month slog through mountains against skilled German defenders. Allied hopes for a quick dash through Italy to Austria, outflanking German defenses in France, proved illusory. Sicily was neither the soft underbelly Churchill envisioned nor the decisive theater Americans feared. It was a necessary campaign that secured strategic objectives, gained valuable experience, and maintained offensive momentum. The lessons learned in Sicily about amphibious operations, combined arms coordination, coalition management, and German defensive capabilities would prove invaluable when planning the Normandy invasion 11 months later. For the soldiers who fought there, Sicily was a hard campaign in brutal summer heat against a skilled enemy. For the commanders, it was a learning experience marked by both success and friction. For the Allies overall, it was the first step back onto the European continent, a gateway that, once opened, led inexorably toward Berlin and final victory. The invasion of Sicily proved that Fortress Europe could be assaulted successfully, but it also demonstrated that the path to victory would be neither swift nor easy. The Allies had opened the gateway to Europe. Now came the hard part, walking through it all the way to Germany's unconditional surrender.